Call this meeting to order. It is Tuesday, March 18th, 2025, and it's 3:15, and we're here to discuss the county blight process. I know we've had questions on who starts it and on how it works. I did look at some minutes back when the other prosecutor, Keisha Oxendine, was in, and she kind of laid it out. And the way it was laid out is, from what I understand, is the blights go to planning and zoning first to see if there's any buildings or anything like that, and then it's to go to the prosecutor's office, and then you guys look at a face value and then send it to the sheriff's office, and then it goes from there.
It can.
Yeah.
So the difficulty with blights is that they a lot of times begin at various agencies. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people will go directly to the sheriff's office, and the sheriff's office will send someone else to go take a look at it. Sometimes it comes to planning and zoning, and they look at it from a building perspective or potentially a code violation perspective. Other times they're sent in through direct complaints to the commissioners. Mm-hmm. So that's where we struggled with how do all of those come together, and what is the best process, mm-hmm. right? Because the sheriff's office and the deputies have all of their ability and authority to go and issue notices for blights or charge them on their own.
Okay.
Because it is either a county or a state code that they can cite to. Where then we also run into problems is then, where does the process go, right? Do we make sure that all of them go through the same process? Or do we deal with them on a case-by-case basis? Where we found a lot of success is when it does come to planning and zoning, they can take a look at what codes are being violated in total. And then we work collaboratively with them on sending out notices and potentially making contact with the owners. The one that comes up year after year is the Kuykendall, the Shazer, edge of Silver Valley Road space. In that scenario, the Kuykendalls and the Shazers don't respond to criminal actions. They just don't care that much. And so we also find a problem with how do we deal with it in the most economical way, and the way that gets us to the route that we're looking for, which is just for it to be cleaned up. So we have the criminal route and we have the civil route, and both of those take different forms. On the criminal route, it usually gets funneled to the sheriff's office, or it can be charged directly through us because we can charge things from an affidavit. We've done that on various occasions with city clerks, with planning and zoning, things like that. Or the sheriff's office can deal with it directly, like I said. On the civil side, it's a little bit more labor intensive because we have to comply with certain notices and summonses for the court process. Sometimes they get us to the same end and sometimes they don't. For someone that is concerned about jail time, the criminal route is usually faster and cheaper. On the civil side, it is more expensive and takes a lot more time. It's more expensive because at the end of the day, it's the entity that ends up footing the bill to clean it up. Mm-hmm. On the criminal side, we can work with some things in order to make them clean it up through negotiations, but that sometimes almost always never happens because it gets to that position in that state over years, months, whatever the case may be. And so in order to get them to clean it up in a reasonable amount of time is longer than the normal court process for a misdemeanor, which is usually what these cases are. If they do respond to jail time or fines in that realm, it's great. It's easy. We can have them clean it up either on a prosecutor's probation, prior to any dismissal, whatever the case may be. On that end, it's great. Because then the county's not splitting the bill except for, of course, our salaries and things in the normal court procedure. And we don't have to do anything with mess. On the civil side, it gets us to the same end, right? So it's cleaned up by the county's standards because we do it. Where then it becomes a problem is, of course, when our constituents are concerned that we're cleaning up someone's personal property, which isn't county property. And then on the back end, if and when they do pay it. So we can, of course, assess that cost to them. But then, do they actually pay it? Probably not. We have gone through that process with the Kuykendalls and the Shazers. We did get to where the court would allow us to go into the property and clean it. I just don't know that we ever found anyone that we were going to contract with in order to do that.
Okay. Now on that, I've seen where we just had an example of that last year, where it was the city of Wardner. They went up and they cleaned up the property, and it was like $30,000. And what they did is they put it on the tax rolls, and the delinquent taxes came up this last year, and it went to tax sale.
Mm-hmm.
So is that how?
That is usually through the court's order. So,
Okay.
yeah, so we can ask the court that if it's not paid, then it is assessed to the tax roll for that person.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. But, I mean, as we saw with the hate property, that didn't come to fruition until
Yes.
6 years later.
6 years later, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So we usually have this discussion every couple of years on how we get to the ends that we're trying to get to.
Okay.
And like I said, they just come in from so many different facets that it's hard to keep track of them in total.
Okay. So what we're here for is, how do we want to get started on this, and where should they go, and who's doing what, and just so we can get them started and figure out what our next step will be, because we're getting more in.
Mm-hmm.
Are we talking about the one property or all of them?
All of the properties.
There's
Okay.
we have, I think, is it 5 or 6 right now?
Mm-hmm.
And then we just got a 7th yesterday. 7, 8, and 9. I think there's 3 different properties.
The city of Mullen, I think, the city clerk keeps track of all of them in like a spreadsheet on where they are and kind of puts them in a priority list of which ones they want to tackle first. I think that's certainly an option. They don't have to be originated by a complaint. If you as commissioners have identified that your constituents in general want to see blights cleaned up, and we just identify what those addresses are and start ticking through them, that's fine. And then we, of course, we work with planning and zoning and the sheriff's office on noticing procedures and other code violations.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What is the legal definition of a blight?
That's a good question. So it varies generally. But what the standard is and what's in our code is something that is injurious to the health and well-being of those around it. So it can be things that are, public nuisances or attractive nuisances, things that would bring in children that get hurt or rodents. A lot of times there's a separate section for weeds, but it's all kind of encompassed in the general well-being of the property itself. One of the big things are appliances that are left, especially those that are airtight seals, so refrigerators, freezers, and things like that. Those are specifically laid out for nuisances that are injurious to the health and welfare of people in general. So it's a loose definition. And so then we always walk the line when we're talking about someone's private property on what you can and cannot do on your own property. And when it does start to cross that line of, is this injurious to the public in general or just the property owners, right? And so that's also a tight line that we walk. Most people would say, well, it's obvious. I know it when I see it. But to the people that live in it, maybe it's not,
And vehicles and trailers and that sort of thing too. I mean, when it starts to look like a junkyard and they've got
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So
encroaching on roadways too.
yes. Right. So when it comes
County
into the roadway,
roadways.
that's usually an easy line to draw. Right.
Yeah.
So when it obviously starts impeding traffic or on county property, those are easy bright line rules. When we're talking about being on someone's property, where is that line? And it varies.
So if they're on public right of ways, they should go to the sheriff's office, right?
Depends on what it is. Yeah. If it's something that can be towed, probably. If it's not, then that's a little bit different.
Okay.
Because of course they have, the contractors to tow. They don't necessarily have contractors to move like
Yeah.
pieces of equipment and things of that nature. So.
Does the number of cars, does our code include anything on like how many cars you can have sitting around?
4.
Is it 4? Okay, so some of them have codes. I didn't know if ours does specifically, but and that's tough, right? And usually,
it is.
right? So, and when we identify them as either non-working or unregistered, that's also rough because how do we know if it runs or not?
Yeah.
Without specifically inspecting it or going to turn the key ourselves. Registered is also tough because if it doesn't run, then who's going to register a vehicle that doesn't run? And is 4 on your property that do all run and are all registered because there's 4 people that drive, or if there's 5 people that drive in the same house. That's a tough one too.
Yeah, so we have two different ordinances. One on
Yeah, 162
nuisances,
and 160.
and then we have one on storage of storage of discarded vehicles. We have and then we do have our wrecking yard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. Yes, we have
Okay.
3 separate codes that kind of are trying to work together and intermingle. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we kind of indicated everything would start with your office. What
The way I
are your
read the
feelings on
ordinance,
that?
the ordinance specifies that the complaint can be delivered to either the sheriff's office, the board's office, or planning and zoning. So
Okay.
certainly, planning and zoning tends to be the place where people start, and that's fine. You take the complaint, and if it would certainly assess it for anything that would be land use or property infringement or building related,
Okay.
and then we can pass it on if it doesn't include us particularly.
Okay.
Or if whatever part does, then we can also pass the rest on to, we typically have the issue where we pass it on to the prosecuting attorney, and then they can assess whether or not it needs to go to the sheriff or not, and where it goes from there. And then if it's a couple buses running at the same time, then we coordinate the noticing for building or land use along with the noticing for the blight.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Tag team where we can, so we're not duplicating efforts, we're not
Right.
3 people going to inspect the same thing.
Right.
Don't make the homeowners feel harassed
Mm-hmm.
by our departments.
Mm-hmm.
Get one and done.
Yeah, address all the issues
Right.
together. Mm-hmm.
Well, legal counsel, what would you recommend when the commissioners receive these? Because we're not really in on all we're good at is passing it to somebody in this case, it sounds like.
Yes and no. So if it's going to take the civil route, we would need to have authorization from you guys to do that. Because if we're going to get to the end of the civil route, it's going to be a discussion of if they don't clean it up in the timely fashion that is ordered by the court, the only other route that we have is the county goes in to do it. If it is a property where we get to that point and it's either a large enough property with so many issues, or it's just one that is of public concern in general, and we are looking down the civil route, then it's going to need to come from a commissioner standpoint to approve that work being done because it's a cost.
Not being legal, but I could add, and certainly start with bringing it to one of us and bringing it to us. And from a planning and zoning standpoint, we can look at the property, look at maps, we can look at what's there and try to assess the complaint that you've taken in and is it valid, is it not, and then If it's worthy to go take a site visit on, great. If it's worthy of passing it up, then the sheriff's department goes and does that investigation. And probably then determining, is this a property that you might be wary going out to, or is it a property where you know who it is and you just need to go talk to whoever it is and figure out what to go from there. So sometimes that's a big element of, is this a property that is safe to go confront somebody about, or is there enough probable cause to just send a notice? Planning and zoning, sometimes we're not quite sure, and without going onto the property to verify, we'll send out a project inquiry letter that says, hey, we think you got something going on, but we want to come look at it, see what we get for a phone call, see what we get for a dialogue, and then go from there. Once we can do the inspection, then we can determine what is in violation and what's not. Sometimes there's junk, but sometimes it's not light, so which is not really our place to determine that either, but
Yeah, exactly.
So I would suggest that if you do receive a complaint and it ends up being one, or you think that it's one that's big enough for a consideration for civil action, then we can work collaboratively with P&Z, our office, and the commissioners in order to do that. Any other ones, probably send to planning and zoning and they can work on it.
Okay.
So the ones that will stay with you and we'll work together are bigger projects.
Okay.
Okay.
Does the sheriff's office have designated blight handlers?
Absolutely not.
Because I mean, if we got to coordinate, it'd be nice to be able to coordinate with somebody, some officer, some part of the department.
It's going to be who's available at the time, unfortunately, at this moment.
Yeah, and a lot of times, so on the sheriff's office side, and correct me if I'm wrong, if they come to the sheriff's office, are you guys also sending them to planning and zoning to look at, or are you guys issuing any blight notices right now?
At the moment, I know pretty much everything was getting sent to planning and zoning. I'd have to check on what it's been in the last 3 or 4 months, if that's changed or not.
You guys did have blight notices that you could handwrite and
Yes.
provide. Okay.
Yes.
And are those in practice anymore?
I haven't seen them in practice in some time, the handwrittens.
But for use with the sheriff's office, typically we utilize them for service of notices.
Yes.
Is what we use them for. They're not typically heavily involved in the investigation of the blight unless it is a situation where we have safety concerns about going to the property.
Let me ask you just your opinion. Do we need a change in our ordinances? Are they too convoluted? Are there tougher ones out there in the world? I mean, Shoshone County seems to be getting worse. Just an opinion.
So, no. In general, no. Because, like I said, we walk that line of, on one end, are we telling people what to do with their property? And we don't want to start crossing over that line because it's Shoshone County. Right? That's not something we typically do. On the other side, the more stringent we become with our ordinances and the more we put into them, the easier they are to get out of and the more loopholes they create. So keeping them more generalized gives us better leeway in order to pursue them. I'll take a look at the storage of vehicles and our blight and see if we maybe need to just combine them together. It happens a lot where the storage of vehicles is separated from a blight, but they can still be considered in the blight process. For our wrecking yard, no. I mean, we just went through that one. I think it's fine for now. But for the storage of vehicles, they're usually typically separated out. I'll take a look at them and see if we should combine them. But if they function separately, it usually gives us a little bit more teeth to charge them separately. So we have 2 criminal charges if we go that route. If we file under, actually, I don't know that our storage of vehicles allows us to file for civil action. I'll take a look.
No, there's the cities in the corridor. They have their own ordinances and stuff, and they're pretty strict. I mean, I read a bunch of them so that I could get some research done to these blights. And the county is the county. I mean, I love what happens in the surrounding areas, or you're out and about, you're out in the woods, so it's usually a lot of where there's a lot of traffic is where you get a lot of blight complaints.
And that's one of the problems I see is, coming from a farming community, we had farms
Mm-hmm.
and we had our own junkyards.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was the way it went. And nobody came out and told you that you have to, because they were in use. I mean, we had equipment and everything. So to really, it is a hard line to walk, especially in the county wide.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
in the cities, I can see that. That's just like chicken ordinances that happen and things like that. And,
Mm-hmm.
in the county, it's we are walking a fine line. I understand that. But there is, I guess we have to take them case by case and kind of look at them to see
Well,
what
I
they
think
are.
some are squatters, and
Mm-hmm.
we have that too.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I think it's a case by case.
Right. So
Some
then,
of them,
do we put
yeah,
the onus on the property owner who's
Right.
not
Yeah,
keeping
I
it
think
out? Yeah, that's
Yeah.
tough too.
yeah. So
That's-
it's case by case.
exactly. I think that's
Yeah.
one of the biggest problems that we're coming in right now is we have properties out there that people are coming in and bringing their older motor homes and things like that and are living in them, and we, that's, and I'm sure there's some drugs in some properties that are that way, and it's, that's kind of hard. So I guess we'll just look
Yeah.
at it case by
I
case.
mean,
Case
with
by
the
case.
housing costs and
Mm-hmm.
crisis that we have now, that also is a consideration of, how do we enforce it without forcing someone from the only roof they have over their head. So, it's a tough one. Blights have always been a tough one.
You have any questions? You have any
Yeah.
comments? Questions, comments?
Yeah, I'm glad you guys are addressing this issue. The last time I was down here on something like this, there was a whole new commission. And, to hear that you guys are looking into this, I'm really excited about it because being at Burke Canyon, I don't know if you've got any complaints up there, but it's been a constant problem. And I got to the point where, nothing was getting done. The last time I really saw something done is when Chuck Reynolds was sheriff.
Mm-hmm.
And he cleaned up. He upset a lot of people, but he got the place cleaned up. And I think he would have been a good example
Mm-hmm.
to follow some of what he done, as he did to get it taken care of.
Yeah.
So, but I'm really pleased to see that you guys are addressing this issue. It's not being swept under the carpet. That's why I came down here and wanted to hear for myself. So,
Okay.
thank you.
Any questions?
Okay, when you have the blight and it has been turned in and you're told, oh, well, you have to go to court. And then our community went to court on the Taylors. It's not the one that's not the junkyard. And nothing was ever done. It's still that way today. It's going up for auction in September for taxes. But how are you going to get their kids out? He is in a nursing home. But it did win in the court. And nothing ever was done.
And I think that's probably kind of the problem with property owners changing, with,
It's the same property owner when they won.
yeah.
This has been like 2018, 2019.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still the trashy mess it was at that point in time. Nothing has ever been done. And then, like, when I send mine in, I send it usually to the prosecutor, to the sheriff, and to the commissioners.
Mm-hmm.
I figure if I cover all three of you, and I had no idea about the planning and zoning.
Yeah.
So, because
And that's kind of like the wrecking yard.
yes,
It's kind of in limbo right now because of the situation of where the
she's
person,
in the nursing
yeah.
home.
And so that's kind of
We did have out of Boise, they would have come and picked up all the tires, but it was on the limbo of the payment.
Yep.
But it's a government office down there that contacted you guys, and they were going to come and take care of all the tires there.
Well, actually, they won't come take care of the tires because they came and they took care of them before. That was through Idaho. That's not the EPA, but Idaho
Yeah, it's
DEQ.
DQ.
And I had a conversation
Right,
with
I
them,
know
and
you did.
they said that they did it once, and they're not gonna do it again, cause they cleaned that whole property up at one time.
Mhm.
And then,
Years ago.
years
Yes.
ago, and so they don't wanna spend more money on it, so.
Yeah, they had to have, that's what he said.
Yep.
It was a way of getting payment for
Mhm.
doing it. Cause I think, I'd have to look at my notes, cause it's been years,
Mhm.
but I think it was around 30,000, 20, 30.
Yeah.
But it would have to be a lien against the property
Mhm.
then. But what I understand, because she's in a nursing home, it might go to the county anyhow, or
It'd be the state, yeah,
state, yeah.
so. Okay.
Right, and that's also a consideration, is that as soon as we do clean them up, how
We're gonna pay
long
for
does
it.
how
Yeah.
long does it take for it to get back to the same state?
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well, it's not a wrecking yard anymore. It is done.
Well, I mean, just in
these
general.
commissioners
Yeah.
closed it off as being a wrecking yard. And it's the problem if a fire starts, and they've had a couple fires since I moved into my place. And those fires, our houses, none of our houses be worth a dime, because that black smoke takes over your whole house.
Well, we're concerned about the same thing that happened in Kellogg with the, what was that, McConnell building when it went?
Yeah.
And how it started multiple fires around the community.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we were concerned about with this wrecking yard, because
Yeah.
we had like 6 fires in 4 years over there.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And it was threatening the community,
Mhm.
but nothing was getting done about it. Now that it's not a wrecking yard anymore,
Yeah.
that's great, it just needs to
we
be
gotta
cleaned
get,
up.
yeah.
All right. Anybody else?
Is, on the blight complaints, is it required for them to actually put their name
Yeah.
What was
on
that?
the complaint? When somebody comes in and complains, you know, they fill out the form, is it really required for them to put their name down? It is nice to have a contact information, but, I mean, you're kind of putting them out there.
We just had an anonymous the other day, so I think is that.
Yeah, no, because it's not one of those crimes where as soon as it's reported, that's the only person that knows about it.
Mhm.
It can be corroborated by other people, so I wouldn't say that it needs to have an individual attached, or a name attached to it.
I just kind of afraid that, you know, somebody is complaining and then the property owner finds out who it is, and now we have a civil feud going on out there in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
So, well, let's try to squash that now.
Yeah, well, and
Not putting-
I mean, it's, because it's a county record, it can be requested as a public record, so that's always a concern.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would say no, it doesn't need to be.
Okay. Do you have any further questions
No, I think.
from you?
I'm just sitting here thinking, based on what you said, apparently Pine Creek used to be farmland, because we have an awful lot of that going on.
Yeah, that's right. All right. No further questions. Meeting adjourned.